pride, deception, and a breathtaking collapse. Witness how one individual's fortune failed to shield him from the consequences of his actions. The murmuring throughout the courtroom hummed like a colony of agitated wasps, electricity charging the atmosphere. Citizens crammed into the seating area, elbow to elbow, their gazes darting toward the accused person's desk. Rumors traveled from one set of lips to another, each piece of gossip more shocking than the previous. Then he made his entrance. Towering, wide-shouldered, and wearing an expensive charcoal-colored suit, the individual presented himself with a self-assurance that verged on conceit. His smoothed back hair shone beneath the overhead lighting, and he grinned at the gathering, as though the space had assembled to celebrate him, not to pass judgment. Ethan Grayson, the identity that had controlled news stories for several weeks, appeared more like an honored guest than an accused party charged with embezzling millions from families in need. However, it wasn't his arrival that captured attention. It was what occurred when Judge Monica Lee stepped into the courtroom. Wearing her dark judicial robes, Judge Lee approached with understated command as she walked toward the platform. She had no need to elevate her voice or glance at the spectators to demand respect. Her mere presence was sufficient. Her standing went before her, a straightforward judge who placed justice above everything else. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Monica Lee," the court officer declared, and everyone stood. Everyone but Ethan Grayson. The space became quiet. Every gaze moved to the defendant who stayed in his seat, nonchalantly browsing through a notepad, as if the legal proceedings were a minor annoyance. His attorney moved closer, speaking with urgency, but Ethan dismissed him with a careless wave of his hand. Judge Lee stopped at her platform, her stare penetrating. Her expression revealed nothing, but the quiet became more oppressive with each moment that passed. A whisper spread through the spectators, the shock evident. Who did this individual believe he was? Yet Ethan remained unmoved. His look was self-satisfied, almost challenging the judge to respond. "You may be seated," Judge Lee stated, her tone controlled but resolute. She didn't acknowledge the insult, not immediately, but the mood in the space had changed. The strain wasn't merely noticeable now, it was overwhelming. But this was merely the start. Ethan Grayson was about to discover the difficult way that even the most prosperous and privileged individuals are not exempt from the law. Ethan Grayson wasn't simply any affluent individual. He was the type of wealthy that generated news coverage, expensive boats, multi-million-dollar estates on both shores, personal aircraft, and celebrations that could compete with celebrity gatherings. His commercial empire, Grayson Investments, had previously been praised as a symbol of financial achievement. But beneath the sparkle and elegance was a more sinister reality. Grayson's climb to success had been constructed on lies, offering small business proprietors and working-class families an opportunity to protect their futures. He had persuaded hundreds to put their life savings into fake investment plans. Pension funds, education savings, even complete family legacies vanished in an instant. The consequences were catastrophic. Families were forced from their homes, parents couldn't afford to feed their children, and elderly couples confronted the frightening reality of spending their remaining years in destitution. The chain reaction of his selfishness extended everywhere, but to Ethan, it was simply commerce. When authorities finally tracked him down, the proof was overwhelming. Financial records, fake paperwork, and statements from previous staff members created a condemning narrative. Still, even with everything closing in around him, Ethan stayed optimistic. "I've hired the finest attorneys money can purchase," he had informed journalists outside his California mansion. "This will pass. It always has." And for some time, it appeared he might be correct. His legal representatives submitted request after request, postponing the trial for months. They portrayed him as a misunderstood business owner, a victim of others' failures. But no amount of legal strategy could eliminate the pile of evidence or the anguish of his victims. When the trial eventually started in San Francisco, the courtroom was filled every day with individuals seeking justice, or at minimum some form of it. Among them was Angela Martinez, a single mother of 3 who had lost her residence after investing with Grayson. Her youngest child had been compelled to leave university. Next to her sat Peter Vaughn, a former firefighter who had spent years preparing for retirement, only to find himself living in his siblings' extra bedroom. Their experiences, and many others, were told in heartbreaking detail throughout. The trial. Angela's voice cracked as she recounted the day she understood she couldn't afford the mortgage payment. "I pleaded with them not to take the house," she said, tears falling down her cheeks. "But they showed no concern. My children had to sleep in our vehicle for 14 days. Do you understand how that feels?" Peter's account was equally devastating. "I spent 35 years rushing into blazing structures," he said, his voice filled with rage. "And this individual burned down my future without hesitation." But throughout everything, Ethan sat there, untroubled. He frequently relaxed in his chair, looking at his phone or sharing jokes with his lawyer. To him, these were merely tales, meaningless chatter that wouldn't alter the result he believed was already decided in his favor. The media consumed it eagerly. Headlines declared his arrogance, his absence of guilt, and the shameless disrespect he had displayed toward the court. Public sentiment was shifting against him, but Ethan was indifferent. As far as he was concerned, public sentiment didn't pay bills. His attorney attempted to change the story. "Mr. Grayson sincerely apologizes for any difficulties caused," the lawyer stated during a media briefing. "But he stays confident that the facts will emerge." The facts, though, were that Ethan had no plans to confess guilt. He was wagering on the system favoring him as it always had previously. But this time, there was one element Ethan hadn't considered. Judge Monica Lee wasn't like the individuals he was accustomed to handling. The trial was a performance. Television trucks filled the roads outside the courthouse, journalists competing for spots to record every moment. Inside, the tension only increased as the days continued. Witness after witness appeared on the stand, each one contributing another piece to Ethan Grayson's symbolic burial. But it wasn't only the testimonies that caused gasps from the spectators. It was Ethan's conduct. On the 3rd day of the trial, the prosecution showed damaging proof, a collection of messages where Ethan clearly told his staff to fake records and deceive investors. The courtroom was silent as the prosecutor spoke his words out loud. "Make the figures appear favorable. We need these fools to sign the contract." The words remained in the air like venom. Angela Martinez, seated in the first row, shook her head in shock. Peter Vaughn tightened his hands. "And Ethan," he grinned. The prosecutor faced him, her voice cutting. "Mr. Grayson, do you identify this message?" His attorney intervened before he could respond. "Objection. This inquiry has been addressed in pre-trial proceedings." Judge Lee lifted her hand, her look controlled but determined. "Denied. The accused will respond to the inquiry." Ethan leaned toward the microphone, his manner filled with disdain. "Yes, I identify it. But let's not act like it means what you're suggesting. It's simply business language. You wouldn't comprehend." The audience burst into murmurs, and the judge's hammer fell like a thunderbolt. "Silence in the court," Judge Lee ordered, her voice piercing through the commotion. She focused on Ethan again. "Mr. Grayson, I suggest you monitor your manner. This is not a corporate meeting." But Ethan didn't waver. If anything, he appeared entertained, as if this was all just an elaborate performance. As the trial progressed, his conceit only increased. He disrupted witnesses with mocking laughter, showed exasperation during questioning, and spoke loudly to his attorney during crucial moments. The spectators observed in amazement as he handled the courtroom like his personal theater. Then arrived the day of Angela Martinez's testimony. She approached the witness stand, holding a folded document and shaking hands. Her voice was unsteady as she started, but her words held the burden of her suffering. "I believed in him," she said, staring directly at Ethan. "I believed in him with everything I possessed, and he ruined my family's future." Ethan didn't even acknowledge her. He leaned back in his seat, carelessly browsing his phone. "Your Honor," the prosecutor interrupted, indicating toward Ethan. "The accused is obviously not listening to the witness." All attention focused on Judge Lee. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes blazed with controlled anger. "Mr. Grayson," she said, her voice controlled. "Put your device away immediately." Ethan looked up, unaffected. "I was just reviewing something urgent," he said, raising the device as if to demonstrate his point. The judge's manner became stern. "I said immediately." For a moment it appeared he might dispute, but then hesitantly he placed the phone down. The strain in the room was evident, but the harm was already complete. Angela's testimony proceeded, but her voice held a shake of disbelief, as if she couldn't understand the absence of basic human respect. By the conclusion of her statement, there wasn't a tearless eye in the courtroom, except for Ethan's. The prosecution concluded its case a week afterward, leaving the defense to present their argument. Ethan's attorney attempted everything, discrediting witnesses, distorting the facts, even presenting Ethan as a victim of aggressive prosecutors, but the flaws were too significant to hide. Throughout it all, Judge Lee kept her calm. She seldom spoke, but her presence hung over the room like a constant, unchanging power. But it was obvious to everyone observing that her tolerance with Ethan's behavior was diminishing. The trial had reached its conclusion. The atmosphere in the courtroom was charged, the expectation almost overwhelming. Journalists occupied the rear seats, their writing instruments ready, and cameras prepared. The viewing area was filled with victims, their expressions showing a combination of fury and expectation. All attention was on Judge Monica Lee as she prepared to announce the sentence. Ethan Grayson sat at the defense desk, his stance as casual as always. He even had the nerve to show a slight smile to the cameras as they recorded his every action. He didn't appear like a man about to receive judgment. He appeared like a man certain he had already succeeded. When Judge Lee finally spoke, the room became silent. "Mr. Grayson," she started, her voice firm and measured, "you have been convicted on all charges of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The proof against you is conclusive, and the accounts of your victims create a clear image of your behavior. You deceived, took advantage of, and destroyed the lives of numerous individuals, all for selfish benefit." Ethan relaxed in his chair, his look unreadable. The judge continued, "Throughout this trial, you have displayed a clear absence of regret. Your conduct in this courtroom has been absolutely shameful. You have offended your victims, ignored this court's power, and handled these proceedings as if they were inferior to you." The audience murmured in approval. Angela Martinez, sitting in the front row, gripped her hands firmly, her knuckles pale. Judge Lee's manner changed, becoming more severe. "Justice, Mr. Grayson, is not about riches, influence, or status. It is about responsibility. And today, you will confront the results of your behavior." The room was so silent you could detect the slight sound of paper moving. Ethan's smile disappeared for the first time as he sat up in his chair. "Therefore," the judge announced, "I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the chance of parole." Gasps came from the spectators. Ethan's expression froze, the color leaving his face. 25 years. He had been anticipating a mild punishment, perhaps a few months in a comfortable facility. But this was unprecedented for someone of his position. Judge Lee wasn't done. "Additionally, I am commanding the immediate sale of your possessions to compensate the victims of your crimes. Every penny you took will be given back to the families you destroyed." The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Angela Martinez covered her mouth with her hands, tears flowing down her cheeks. Peter Vaughn leaned back in his seat, his eyes wide with shock. Ethan jumped from his chair, his face red with rage. "You cannot do this!" he yelled, his voice resonating in the room. "I'm Ethan Grayson. You cannot handle me like some ordinary criminal?" Judge Lee's hammer crashed down, her expression firm. "Mr. Grayson, sit down!" But Ethan wasn't done. "This is ridiculous. I'll challenge this. I'll destroy your career, Judge." The court officers approached, prepared to step in. Judge Lee stayed composed, her voice cutting through his tantrum like a blade. "This is my courtroom, Mr. Grayson, and you will demonstrate respect. Officers, escort the defendant out." As he was taken away, Ethan continued to object, his voice becoming weaker with each step. The courtroom burst into cheers, something that seldom occurred, but seemed completely fitting in the moment. Judge Lee addressed the spectators, her expression becoming slightly softer. "Justice has been delivered," she said. "Let this serve as a warning that no one, regardless of how influential, is exempt from the law." But as the courtroom cleared and the cameras outside started flashing, one inquiry remained in everyone's thoughts. Would this sentence be sufficient to truly transform a man like Ethan Grayson? The courtroom was almost vacant now, except for a few remaining journalists and victims collecting their items. The excitement still lingered in the atmosphere, but for those directly impacted by Ethan Grayson's offenses, the feelings were more complicated. Angela Martinez stood near the courthouse entrance, holding her bag tightly. A journalist approached her with a microphone. "How do you feel following today's decision?" Angela paused, then replied, "I feel relieved. But the reality is, no sentence will remove the harm he inflicted. My children and I are still recovering, but at least now we have hope." Close by, Peter Vaughn was talking with a companion. "It's not only about the years he's receiving," he said, shaking his head. "It's about the statement. Individuals like him believe they're invincible. Today demonstrates they're not." In her office, Judge Monica Lee sat calmly, looking out the window at the activity below. She didn't experience victory or triumph, just a steady determination. Her position wasn't about personal fulfillment. It was about guaranteeing fairness, about reminding everyone that the balance of justice could equalize even against the influence of wealth and privilege. Ethan Grayson's identity would continue to generate headlines for some time, but for the individuals he had harmed, the story was finally ending. The financial compensation would assist many of them in starting fresh, but the wounds he created would require more time to mend. As the weeks went by, the story ignited discussions throughout the nation. It became a call for responsibility, for holding those in authority to the same expectations as everyone else. Individuals shared their own experiences of unfairness, finding courage from the decision. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came from Angela's youngest child, Sophia, who composed a letter to Judge Lee that was later printed in a community newspaper. "Thank you for defending my family," it stated. "Thank you for demonstrating that people like Ethan Grayson cannot escape consequences for harming people like us. You didn't just provide us justice, you gave us a fresh start." The account of Ethan Grayson's trial was more than just a courtroom story. It was a testament to the strength of regular people, the significance of honesty, and the conviction that justice can and should triumph regardless of the challenges. So, as you reflect on this story, consider this. What does responsibility mean to you? And in your own existence, how can you guarantee that fairness and justice are not merely concepts, but practices? Because ultimately, justice isn't solely the duty of the courts. It's something we all must advocate for every single day.